Katie Ullman reporting for Katie Chats at Hotdocs Film Festival in downtown Toronto with filmmaker Gabriel London. How does it feel to have your film, The Life and Mind of Mark Defriest, here at Hotdocs?
Feels great. It's a film that I was making for a total of 13 years, if you can believe that. It started out for me on a project that I was doing for Human Rights Watch, and I was really looking around at all these different prisoner narratives, different stories. I was in contact with just so many different organizations that were looking at issues of abuse in U.S. prisons, and I came across Mark's story in the most unbelievable way. And on the one hand, I had this newspaper article that I had read about the worst, the darkest, deepest hole in Florida for prisoners, and it was mentioned this one non-violent offender who was held with the worst of the worst guys, and they mentioned this escape history and this incorrigible behavior of just disciplinary infractions. And I thought, that's interesting. How do you be a non-dangerous person and get stuck with like the most dangerous folks? And then ultimately, the next day, I was given a whole treasure trove of his letters. 15 years of letters that he had written, really recounting some of the most painful, intimate details of what had happened to him in the prison system. And when I realized I could combine the two, the sort of public persona of this Houdini of Florida with this private side of him, which was suffering, I felt like, wow, that's an amazing story that I have to go with. So to come here with it 13 years later, like to have incubated it and worked on it for 13 years and then to premiere it here in Toronto is just a dream.
And for people who don't know much about Mark Defriest yet, can you sum up a little bit of his story of him being a young man going to jail and still being in jail in his 50s now, years later, and sort of his path just a little bit?
Yeah, I think when Mark Defriest was first sent to prison when he was 19 years old, there was no expectation from anybody, even the harshest judges, that he would ever spend his entire life in prison. And I even think in the subsequent years after he became an escape artist, which really happened so quickly, there was still no expectation that he would be in prison into his 50s. Mark Defriest went to prison at age 19 in a dispute with his stepmother over a will. His father and he had been mechanics together, and not just any kind of mechanics. Mark had an incredible mechanical gift that he was born with. He could repair clocks and watches. He would take apart toasters and radios, and he could build things as like a 6, 7, 8-year-old. Everybody remembers this. All his relatives remember this in the film. And he and his father had this business together, and his dad died suddenly. Mark had a dispute with the stepmother over the execution of the will, and Mark basically went and gathered the tools that had been willed to him by his father, and the stepmother called the police, and Mark made a mistake which is very telling, and it sort of ultimately really speaks to how he's still in prison all these years later. Rather than understanding how to interact with the people who were coming, the police officers who were coming to interview him and find out what happened, he ran. And Mark, has a tendency of not understanding how to interact with other people. He's not, I would say, in any way a scary person. He's not a violent person. He simply has social problems. And I think there's a lot in the movie that really gets at this question of really whether he should have ever been put in prison in the first place. Yes, the tools were something that were willed to him. That first crime is such a minor crime. But then subsequently his behavior really was indicative of a larger problem that the system tried to grapple with for a time, but then in the end they just put him to prison and left him there.
And throughout the film we see some very disturbing recreations of and retellings of what Mark went through in jail, including rape multiple times and solitary confinement. Well, you were discovering this information. How did that feel, and what were your responses as you were on the journey of making the film?
The way I first found his story through those letters, the letters that really detailed him really confessing what had happened to him, the rape that he had endured, the ongoing deal with the devil he had to make in order to survive, which included a kind of continual sexual relationship that wasn't necessarily fully fully what he wanted. Yeah. He was really grappling with the circumstances, with the need to survive. And, ultimately for me to go in and actually bring that to life was always this question about alienating audiences. I really felt like, Mark was an incredibly complex character. He could not be summed up as any one thing. He couldn't be a victim alone. He couldn't be Houdini alone. He couldn't be the innocent guy who shouldn't have gone to prison in the first place alone. There was so many different sides to his personality, and the real task of the film was to find the balance so that audiences could access him, so that they could essentially take the fun from the Houdini side of his personality, at the same time that they could accept the pain of what happened when he went into the Wendy side of his personality. And these were all different ways that he coped with the basic injustice of what was happening to him in the prison system. So, for me, that balancing act of the film, of where we're presenting, that dark side of prison reality, is balanced out by his humor and his ingeniousness and the things that he does to get out of jail.
And in the film, you also touch on sort of mental illness, the possibility of that. And can you speak a little bit to the importance of assessing offenders, I suppose, while they're entering the prison system and as they are in the prison system, to see, especially when they're so young, how the experience is affecting them, and if they, in fact, are dealing with other issues as opposed to just a specific crime?
Yeah, and I think that this is an issue that it's a global issue, and I know that it's been an issue with the treatment of the mentally ill here in Canadian jails, with the Ashley Smith inquest, right? And in so many ways, you're absolutely right that there is, at the initial intake into a prison setting, the role of a successful system is to do proper classification, what's called classification, where you essentially understand the type of crime, the type of personality, and the type of environment that need to be considered in placing somebody where they will be in the prison setting. And I think in the case of Mark, there was a clear effort by a number of people in the system, prosecutors as well as his defense attorney, to recognize that he had something that was specifically wrong with him, in a sense, in how he was processing and how he was going into the legal system. Mark was spectacularly self-destructive. When he would have a lawyer who was on his side, he would not work with that lawyer. He would just go ahead and plead guilty. So Mark Defriest is somebody who would enter into the prison system, into the criminal justice system, and never be his own advocate. And other people that tried to advocate on his behalf were ultimately sidelined when the mental health professionals who had seen him were overridden by one doctor and one judge, and that doctor figures in our film, and it's an important part of our story of how a wrong gets righted in the film, in a sense. But what you really notice when you look back on Mark's case history, and on so many people who grapple with mental illness in prison, is that there's often people who are trying to help them, and it's sort of the responsibility of everybody in the system to leave that door open and to make sure that there are chances to go back and reconsider it. In Mark's case, once he had been found to be competent, mentally competent to be sentenced, it was like that whole story of mental illness just got shut. There was no further treatment, there was no further effort to sort of understand, well, if he's having problems in the prison setting, and those problems aren't that he's a fighter, they're not that he's violent, they're not that he's assaulting other people, none of those things. If the problem is that he's mouthing off, or he's being in some way difficult and not obeying orders, maybe you should look back at the case file of his mental problems and understand that, oh, there's a connection there. And if that would have happened, if they would have simply evaluated and understood the context of his disciplinary problems, he probably would be parole eligible today. He would be able to get out of prison. He is largely in prison today, not for the crimes. He is in prison now for the symptoms of his mental illness, which have led to these disciplinary reports. That is ultimately a great tragedy, that so many people like Mark are in prison not for their crimes anymore, but for the fact that they have mental problems and they don't rise to the level of being paroled.
And do you think that there's any hope for Mark in the future? And having been screening this film, what have been the audience reactions in terms of the support for his situation?
The audiences here in Toronto have been so compassionate and so moved by Mark. They've also laughed with him, which I think Mark would be happy about. He's a funny guy, he's a great storyteller, and he makes light of his situation as a way of surviving, so it's good that that made it into the film. You know, the future for Mark is tied up in audiences as well. You know what I mean? Like, his story, until I really found it, was basically buried, you know? And he's now coming to light. His story is coming to light. And I think ultimately audiences can share the story, and they can also become active in the story. You know, as long as he has a chance of being paroled, there is pressure that can be put on the system to reconsider, to think about, you know, the possibility that he could be paroled. And I think ultimately, I have people in the film who say, you know, on the parole commission, who say, you know, his crimes, he could have gone out long ago. You know, and now that he's really seen the film coming together, he understands that there's a hope for him. His behavior has very much normalized, and he's really gained a sense not just of how to survive the day-to-day the way he did in Florida in those really difficult time periods, but also now to think about the future and to plan for the future. So I think audiences, as they see this film, I hope they're going to share it, but I also hope that they're going to sort of join up with it. You know, they're going to do, you know, there's great examples like the West Memphis 3, you know, where we see that audience participation made a huge difference in moving forward a legal trajectory that set 3 people free. And I think in Mark's case, as long as he's participating and his behavior is good, which it is now, and he's being recognized for that, audiences can make a petition, or they can write a letter, or they can write an email to that Florida Parole Commission and say, hey, give Mark another chance.
And has Mark seen the film, and what does he think of it, if he has?
I read a review from Cinema Access to Mark on the phone last week, which was wonderful to be able to do. That was right before I came up here, you know, on earlier this week. And to hear himself described as, you know, ingenious, with a watchmaker's mind, you know, it was really great for him to have, I think, that acknowledgement. You know, he's somebody who has lived his life according to a kind of moral code. You know, I know that's hard to believe, you know, but he has really lived it in such a way where he has not allowed himself to be broken by the system, where he has always maintained his dignity and found ways of being inventive. So to hear himself recognized like that is super special. And I think that I will not have a chance to show him this film. He is still very much in prison. There's no such thing as me walking in a DVD to him. But, you know, he keeps saying, well, could you sell it to like Spike TV or, you know, somebody like, you know, one of the broadcast networks that he gets on prison cable. And not so sure. Yeah. But we'll see, you know, and there's always that possibility. And, you know, as long as there's some sort of an open door there at the prison, that they know that this film and the efforts that audiences are making on behalf of Mark are positive. It's not about a gotcha situation. It's not an expose. A lot of the abuse that we talk about is in the years past. You know, as long as the prison and the prison system knows that we want to be partners with them and not be antagonistic, I think there's always a possibility that Mark could see his own story inside the prison. But I think before that even happens, the main responsibility we have is just to make sure that he gets a chance to get out of prison.
And where's the best place for us to find out more information on the film and how we can see it online?
Yeah, we have basically every single social channel that people might want to be involved in. I would love it if people would visit our website at Defriest.com and sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter will be everything from emails about Mark's current situation and what people can do to where they can tell friends to see the film. So we'll have big announcements coming up about our U.S. premiere that'll be this week, and then beyond that, I think people can also be involved on our Facebook page, on our Instagram page, and on our Twitter feed. So that's all of those are Defriest Film. So that's at Defriest Film and Facebook.com Defriest Film. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Congratulations on a terrific film, and best of luck with your upcoming projects as well.
Thank you so much. It's a great thing to be able to sit down with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm Katie Allman reporting for Katie Chats at the Hotdocs Film Festival in downtown Toronto.